Would you believe it if I told you that a dog walked alone into a burning hospital, risking his own life, and left there with a baby in his teeth? Sounds like a movie scene, doesn't it? But what if I tell you that stories like this really happened, and that behind each of them there is something that goes far beyond animal instinct? What you will discover now may surprise you, because this isn't just a tale of courage. It's a lesson in love, loyalty, and sacrifice that makes us rethink how far the true essence of the word hero goes. Imagine the scene. Corridors filled with smoke, people running desperately. Chaos ensued. Fire consumes everything around you, and every second can mean the difference between life and death. At that time, any of us would think of running away, of saving our own skin. But in the midst of this scenario of despair, a dog does exactly the opposite. He does not retreat, does not hide, does not hesitate. He advances against danger, guided by something invisible and powerful, as if he knew that within that hell there was a life that depended on him. Have you ever been through this? To feel that something greater than yourself pushes you to act, even when fear seems greater than courage. The power of these stories lies precisely in what we cannot explain. Scientists can talk about protective instinct, conditioned behavior, or even natural reflexes of dogs. But is this enough to translate what really happens? When an animal decides to put its own existence at risk to save that of another being, and whether human or not, it breaks through any logical barrier. And this is where the real impact is born. We realize that heroes can appear in the most unexpected forms, even with four paws, attentive muzzle, and a look full of compassion. Now I want you to reflect with me. Why do these stories move us so much? Perhaps because deep down they reveal something humanity insists on forgetting, that life is worth more when it's shared, that courage is a choice that doesn't always require words, and that love can be expressed in ways we would never have imagined. Her dog entering a burning hospital is not just a scene impossible to ignore. It is a living symbol of hope, of surrender, of instinct transformed into heroic gesture. Stay with me until the end, because this journey will show you details that go far beyond a simple act of bravery. And here comes a curious point. At critical moments when everyone runs away, who do you think is ready to risk everything without thinking twice? The dog, the one who is often seen only as a companion, shows that it is capable of being much more. He becomes the protagonist of a plot in which there are no guarantees of survival, but there is certainty of purpose. This contrast between human despair and animal determination is what gives the narrative strength and holds us in an almost visceral way. What drives these silent heroes? Love, loyalty, or something even deeper that we can't even name? Have you ever noticed how stories of dogs that save lives always go viral, move crowds, and are engraved in the collective memory? This is because somehow they touch a space within us that still believes in goodness, in purity of intent, in the genuine act of protecting without expecting anything in return. And when we witness, even if through stories, an animal risking everything for a fragile life, we understand that heroes do not wear a cape. They can bark, wag their tail, and carry in their teeth proof that the impossible can come true. So get ready, because what you will follow from now on is much more than an exciting account. It is an immersion in one of the most impactful scenes ever starred by a dog, and that will make you look at these animals with even more admiration. Hold on to that emotion, because the next step in this story promises to move deep into your heart. And perhaps this is precisely the most exciting point. When we hear stories like this, we cannot remain indifferent. They awaken something within us, a mixture of admiration, gratitude, and even reflection on our own attitudes toward danger or life. This is when I want to invite you to participate in this conversation. If this topic makes sense to you, leave here in the comments what touched you the most so far. It can be a memory of a dog that was part of your life, an opinion about what it means to be a hero, or even the feeling that this scene awakens you. Your vision can further enrich this space, because each comment is like a new piece that helps build this community of people who believe in the strength of love and courage. And look, if you are feeling the same emotion that I feel when telling this story, don't forget to enjoy the video. This simple gesture makes a huge difference. It's like a sign that this content is coming to you, and at the same time it helps spread that message to even more people who need to hear something inspiring in the middle of the rush of everyday life. It may seem small, but in practice, it is what keeps that flame burning. And if you want to continue following stories like this, real stories, exciting, capable of showing the purest side of courage, subscribe to the channel. It is your registration that ensures that we can continue together, bringing more and more stories that inspire, excite, and strengthen our faith in what is most beautiful in life. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content, turning each video into a meeting point for those who value emotion, empathy, and companionship. So, comment, like, subscribe, because your every gesture is like a hug that pushes this work to go even further. And stick with me, because the story is only just beginning, and what comes next promises to stir your heart even more. It was a seemingly ordinary night in a small town in the interior of the United States, a place where the routine was quiet, marked by the meetings of neighbors in the bakery, the conversations in the main square, and the clock that seemed to move at its own pace, slower than in the big centers. At the heart of this community stood a simple but vitally important hospital for all who lived there. It wasn't a Moderna medical center, full of cutting-edge technology and endless corridors, but it was the kind of place where every nurse knew patients by name, and where doctors carried not only knowledge, but also a sense of responsibility that connected them to those people in an almost familiar way. That night, like so many others, the hospital was in regular operation. The lights in the corridors glowed softly, illuminating consultations, routine conversations, and small urgent care. The whole city slept in relative peace, without imagining that in a few hours everything would be shaken by an unexpected event, something capable of turning that calm into absolute chaos. The dark night would be illuminated not by the moon or the stars, but by the flames of a devastating fire. As the first sparks began to spread, the silence of dawn was broken by the crackling of burning wood and the distant sound of sirens. The fire quickly spread, taking over areas inside the hospital. What was once synonymous with safety and care has turned into a scene of despair, with suffocating smoke billowing through the corridors and panicked patients trying to find a way out. It is in these hours that the human mentality is tested to the limit, because every decision made in seconds can set the fate of entire lives. Outside, residents woke up frightened by the movement and soon gathered, trying to somehow help. It was as if fate had placed that city before a litmus test, literally. Between screams, running, and tears, there was also the weight of impotence. Some tried to organize groups to help. Others just watched without knowing what to do, dominated by fear. And it is in this contrast between action and paralysis that the hidden truth of courage appears. It is not the absence of fear, but rather the decision to move forward in spite of it. The community hospital was on the verge of collapse. In one of the rooms, a newborn baby was still sleeping in its crib, surrounded by smoke, with life depending on something unlikely. At that moment, anyone would say that the chance of rescue was minimal. The smoke intoxicated, the heat suffocated, and the human instinct, of course, was to move away. But that's exactly where the unexpected happened. In the crowd that formed outside, a dog watched the movement intently. It was not just any dog. He was already part of the daily life of the city, always seen running through the streets, accompanying residents or receiving cuddles from those who passed by. For many, it was just a beloved animal, a symbol of affection and companionship. But that night his role would change radically. Guided by something that seemed larger than himself, that dog advanced towards the burning hospital, ignoring the warning cries and the arms that tried to hold him. And here is the revelation that strikes. While dozens of people hesitated to approach the flames, that animal made a quick decision, as if understanding the impact of what it was about to do. This scene shows how often the transformation of a critical situation does not come from where we expect it. The hero can emerge in the most unlikely of ways, shattering our certainties and revealing a hidden truth about courage and instinct. Inside the hospital, the smoke made it almost impossible to see, but somehow the dog found its way into the room. The cradle was there, surrounded by shadows and impending danger. With surprising delicacy for someone in the midst of chaos, the animal snatched the blanket that enveloped the baby and, in the midst of the flames, began its journey back. Every step was a challenge, every second felt like a test. And yet, he went on, bringing in his teeth not only a life, but also a symbol of hope for the whole city. The image of that dog leaving the hospital in flames, with the baby safe, is one of the most powerful that can be imagined. There was no script prepared, there was no camera to stage, but there was a real spectacle, raw and overwhelming, of courage and delivery. The impact of this act was not restricted to that moment. It echoed as a revelation to all who witnessed. Courage is not measured by size, strength, or social standing, but by the decision to act when all seems lost. And the most impressive thing is to realize how such a scene has the power to reprogram our mentality. After witnessing something of this kind, it is impossible to look at life in the same way. This is the great transformation that a seemingly simple gesture can generate. It changes not only the present, but also the way we face the future. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because behind this extraordinary scene there are a number of layers that need to be explored. There's the behind the scenes of the tragedy, the emotional revelations that surfaced in the days that followed, and the collective impact that this heroic act had on that community. More than a rescue, it was the beginning of a journey of reflection for everyone who followed that story. And I want to invite you to participate in this reflection together with me. He says, "That makes sense to me." The fire started almost imperceptibly, a minor detail amid the routine of a community hospital that until that moment seemed to follow the quiet rhythm of every other night. A spark, a quick crack in the already time-worn wiring, a short circuit that could have gone unnoticed if someone was lucky enough to be around. But that night, the entire city would be forced to watch a spectacle of tragedy and revelation. Fate chose just that moment to turn the calm into chaos. At first, the smell of smoke seemed something distant, almost harmless, like when someone forgets something on the stove. But in a matter of minutes, reality showed its cruel face. The fire found paper, fabrics, and flammable materials, spreading like a hungry beast that could no longer be contained. The corridors, once illuminated by a silent peace, began to gain reddish hues that reflected in the frightened gaze of the first who perceived the danger. Nurses working the early morning shift were the first to notice. At first, a look of strangeness, then the certainty that something was wrong. Instinct spoke louder and they rushed to warn doctors and patients. But there was an unbearable dilemma: how to get everyone out of a hospital where many could not move on their own. How to choose who should be saved first when every second felt like a sentence. This is the hidden truth of extreme situations. There is no manual that prepares someone to choose between lives. Soon the fire alarm went off, and that shrill sound cut through the night, mingling with the screams of fear. Doctors, nurses, and patients went into a state of shock. Some ran disorientated through the corridors. Others tried to organize the evacuation with what calmness remained. But the fire did not wait for anyone. He advanced relentlessly, turning walls to ash and filling the lungs with a toxic smoke that made even the strongest falter. It was as if every step in search of a way out was accompanied by the overwhelming weight of an impossible choice. Patients on stretchers were pushed in haste. Wheelchairs slammed against doors in despair. Children cried without understanding why the air became so heavy and difficult to breathe. There were elderly people who could barely keep their eyes open in the face of dense smoke, while health workers tried to carry 2, sometimes 3 at the same time, as if it was possible to beat the fire only by force of will. The setting was chaotic, a stark portrait of the impact of human frailty in the face of the fury of the elements. And here comes a revelation that few dare admit. Amid the survival instinct, many were forced to choose between saving themselves or risking their lives for someone else. Some ran without looking back. Others knelt in despair, unable to decide. But there were also those who, even overcome by fear, found within themselves a courage they never imagined they possessed. This is the transformative power of critical situations. They expose our mindset, reveal hidden truths that would go unnoticed in peacetime. Outside, chaos was spreading in another way. The whole city seemed to have woken up at once. Sirens echoed through the streets. Orange flashes lit up the night sky and families rushed to the hospital, desperate to find out if their loved ones had managed to escape. The collective impact was devastating. That hospital wasn't just a building. It was the heart of the community. Their children were born, their illnesses were cured, their farewells were made. Watching the fire consume each brick was like watching one's own memories being devoured by the flames. As firefighters arrived and tried to contain the blaze, the crowd watched helplessly. People were crying, shouting names, trying to get past the security barrier to enter the collapsed building. But the truth is that few could face the heat and smoke. Every time someone tried to approach, he was forced to retreat, suffocated by the heavy air. The whole city felt the weight of helplessness, before an invisible and implacable enemy. Inside the hospital, the corridors had turned into traps. Fire blocked exits. Smoke made it impossible to see, and panic spread like a wave. But even amid the chaos, individual stories unfolded. A doctor was trying to save two patients at the same time, ignoring the risks to himself. A mother ran with her child in her lap, stumbling, but never letting go. A nurse refused to leave without checking each room, even when her strength was already at the limit. These small narratives, simultaneous and invisible to outsiders, were behind the scenes of a night that would change the mentality of an entire community. And in the midst of all this, there was an unexpected figure. The city dog, known to everyone, watched the fire from the outside. He was restless, pacing from side to side, as if he understood that something terrible was happening inside. While many humans hesitated, retreated, cried, or screamed, that animal seemed to be preparing for something. His gaze fixed on the burning doors conveyed a strange mixture of alertness and purpose, and even if no one could have predicted it, a new layer of that journey was about to reveal itself. It is impossible not to reflect on the contrast. While the human being, with all his rationality, was torn between decisions of self-preservation and ethical dilemmas, the animal remained firm, attentive, ready to act. And this difference leads us to think about the true meaning of courage. Is bravery born of reasoning or instinct? Is it a conscious choice or a hidden truth that emerges when we least expect it? Every minute the fire grew and the city plunged deeper into its own tragedy. But paradoxically, it was also at this moment that a powerful revelation was born. In the midst of the flames, each decision carried the weight of transformation. It didn't matter if it was a doctor, a mother, a nurse, or even a dog. Every act of courage, every gesture, however small, had the power to echo far beyond that night. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because to understand only the beginning of the fire is to look at the surface of the tragedy. What really transforms this story are the behind the scenes of the decision, the moments when life boils down to seconds, the revelations that come when all seems lost. The fire may have been the fuse, but the real journey lies in the impact of choices, the mindset that is born in the midst of chaos, and the courage that reveals itself when we least expect it. Write in the comments, I'm on this journey too. Amid the turmoil engulfing the burning hospital, with doctors trying to guide patients out, nurses rushing to and fro, and desperate families waiting outside for news, there was one silent detail that seemed to escape everyone's attention. In the corner of the children's ward, in a room dimly lit by the lamps that were already beginning to fail because of the fire, among smoke, metallic noises, and doors that slammed hard because of the wind caused by the flames, a small crib remained untouched. Inside him, a newborn baby, so fragile and so dependent, struggled to be noticed. Her crying was low, almost muffled, lost amid the panicked screams and deafening noise of the fire. It's as if the most vulnerable life of all is about to be forgotten in the rush of chaos. The contrast was brutal. On one side, corridors crowded with people trying to save themselves, with the noise of hurried feet, the dragging of stretchers, and the suffocating sound of coughs. On the other, in that isolated room, a frightening silence, broken only by the fragile moan of those who did not even understand what was happening. This duality created an invisible tension, an almost unbearable suspense. How could something so small survive in the midst of so much devastation? This forgotten detail was not the fruit of negligence, but of the cruel nature of despair. In extreme situations, the human brain enters a state of survival, in which instincts speak louder than logic. People focus on what is closest, most visible, most immediate. Who shouts louder? Who runs towards the exit? Who begs for help in the corridors? The invisible is easily left behind. But life, with its ironies, had placed an even greater test there. While everyone was fighting for their own survival, the existence of a defenseless being was in danger of being erased in silence. This scene brings us a painful revelation. Often, behind the scenes of tragedies, it is the most fragile that ends up being forgotten. The smoke was already invading the children's ward with a thickness that seemed almost solid. The air became heavy, difficult to breathe, and every minute that passed meant less oxygen for those tiny lungs. The baby moved little, wrapped in blankets that now absorbed the pungent smell of smoke and the warmth of the approaching fire. The walls began to crack, the ceiling creaked, and it was as if the entire building had become a collapsing prison. There, in that stifling atmosphere, the most fragile life depended entirely on the improbable. And here is the hidden truth. The extreme vulnerability of one newborn completely depends on the perception of another. Without a powerful voice, without strength in your arms, without awareness of what happens, your survival is always in the hands of those who decide to look, notice, act. Amid the greater noise, the little cry was like a whisper of hope, almost blown away by the wind. That baby's fate was tied to the chance that someone would remember him, or something stronger than chance would intervene. Meanwhile, in the corridors, panic grew almost chaotically. Firefighters were already trying to make way, but were overcome by the speed of the flames. Doctors shouted instructions that were lost in the confusion. Nurses, even exhausted, carried patients in their arms, knowing that they would not be able to cope with everyone. Outside, neighbors prayed in silence, as if their prayers were able to break through the walls and reach those trapped. The whole city seemed to hold its breath, but no one realized that in one of the most critical points of the hospital, the most delicate life was about to be swallowed by smoke. This is where the scene takes on an almost unbearable intensity. Imagine the feeling of suspense. Would anyone notice in time? Could you hear that faint cry amid the symphony of chaos, sirens, screams, and crackles of fire? This question hung in the air like an invisible shadow, because the answer could mean the difference between hope and tragedy. This tension is the reflection of life itself. How many times have we not passed by something essential without realizing it, because we were too busy running after what seemed urgent? Outside, the dog was still agitated. His paws beat against the ground. His attentive eyes seemed to seek something beyond the obvious. Many saw only a frightened animal, instinctively reacting to noise and fire. But there was a different restlessness in his movements. He didn't walk away like other animals would. On the contrary, he approached, smelled the smoke-laden air, fixed his gaze towards the doors, as if he had a certainty that no one else possessed. As firefighters organized and people screamed in despair, that dog seemed to know somehow that there was still someone inside, waiting to be found. That's the most intriguing part. While human reasoning was overshadowed by despair, animal instinct seemed to pick up on what human eyes and ears could no longer perceive. The extreme vulnerability of the baby, forgotten in the midst of chaos, turned into a silent call that only the unexpected could answer. And here comes a powerful reflection. How many times in life do we not let essential details go unnoticed, simply because we are stuck in the bigger noise around? How many hidden truths are forgotten in the rush, waiting for someone or something to realize them? The hospital was still engulfed in flames. Time seemed distorted. Seconds dragged on like hours, and every popping or crashing sound added to the tension. But in that children's ward, a fate still hung in the balance. The baby, unable to scream loudly enough, depended on an unlikely intervention. The whole city was focused on the large-scale fire, but the transformation of the whole story was about to take place precisely in that forgotten detail. The suspense was almost palpable. The sound of the fire engulfing walls, the smoke advancing like a living shadow, and the small cry that was lost in the midst of all this formed a breathtaking picture. The coming revelation would not only be about a rescue, but about the power of perception, about how even the smallest of signals can carry a gigantic impact when it is finally heard. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because understanding chaos is only the surface. What really matters is to realize how in the midst of despair, decisions arise that reveal character, instinct, and even what we call a miracle. It was at that moment, when everything seemed lost, that a new chapter began to draw, bringing to light revelations capable of transforming the course of this journey forever. He says, "That makes sense to me." Outside the hospital, the scene was one of pure despair. Firefighters ran, trying to make their way through the doors already consumed by the flames. Neighbors crowded on the sidewalk without knowing what to do. Some prayed in silence. Others shouted the names of relatives in the hope that they would be answered. The fire, relentless, illuminated the sky with a reddish flash that seemed to swallow the night. Chaos took over every look, every gesture, every thought. People cried non-stop. Some tried to film with mobile phones shaking in their hands, as if they wanted to record the tragedy, but most could hardly keep calm. It was as if the entire city was mesmerized by a cruel spectacle of destruction. In the midst of this confusion, an unexpected presence began to attract attention. He didn't scream, he didn't cry, he didn't run in circles like the panicked crowd. His eyes were fixed, attentive, as if they could see something beyond the obvious. It was a mongrel dog of the region, known to all, but that until that moment had never gone beyond one among many other street animals. Many remembered seeing him sleeping in front of the market, running after the children in the square, wagging his tail at any outstretched hand. An ordinary dog, no pedigree, no registered name, no official owner. But that night, the ordinary was about to become extraordinary. He walked among people as if looking for an answer. It sniffed the heavy air, looked towards the burning doors, and stirred with every crack that came from inside the building. As the humans moved away, he seemed to want to get closer. The scene was strange, almost contradictory. On the one hand, the instinct of preservation pushed people away. On the other, that animal, alone, defied danger, as if about to make a decision that would change everything. The smell of smoke burned their nostrils, and even firefighters accustomed to facing the risk hesitated to move forward without equipment. But the dog remained motionless for a few seconds, watching as if assessing the situation. His chest rose and fell rapidly, betraying the fear that also affected him, but his eyes did not look away from the inside of the hospital. It was as if an invisible connection was being created between that animal and the forgotten detail inside. The collective mentality at that time was one of self-preservation. No one could be judged for this. After all, fear is natural. It is human. But the contrast between human flight and dog posture revealed a hidden truth. Courage is sometimes born where we least expect it. He didn't have a firefighter's uniform. He didn't have technical training. He didn't have any obligations. But he had something that no one there seemed to have, a quiet, instinctive determination that made him stand firm in the face of the fire. Some residents even tried to push him away, pushing him with their feet or calling him away, believing that he was just bewildered. One gentleman muttered that animals are afraid of fire and run anywhere, that it was dangerous to leave it there. But that wasn't it. His attention remained focused inside the hospital, as if he could hear beyond what humans could hear. Maybe it was the muffled cry, maybe it was just instinct, but it seemed clear that that dog noticed the forgotten detail that no one else could notice. At that moment, there was a strange silence among the crowd. The sound of the fire kept roaring, but the tension seemed to suspend time. And here's the big reveal. While everyone was running away, the dog decided to move forward. One step at a time, he approached the main entrance, ignoring the intense heat that already made the air look like a wall of fire. His fur bristled, his paws trembled, but he did not retreat. The suspense increased. Would it really be possible for an animal to have the courage to face what even trained firefighters were hesitant to face? The impact of this decision was not only on the scene itself, but on the transformation it represented. The crowd watched in astonishment. Some people shouted for him to come back. Others just stared in disbelief. It was as if they were witnessing something impossible, a moment when human logic lost space to a deeper, inexplicable force. One child grabbed his mother's hand and asked quietly if the dog was going to die. The mother, with tears in her eyes, could not answer. That silence said it all. That dog's journey was just beginning, but it already carried a powerful symbolism, that heroes can emerge from the most unlikely of places. And it wasn't just an instinctive act. It was as if there was awareness in that decision, a clear choice to go against the flow, to throw oneself into danger rather than avoid it. This is the essence of courage. It is not about the absence of fear, but about the decision to move forward in spite of it. While everyone distanced themselves, the dog became the only being willing to face the heart of the tragedy head-on. At that moment, time seemed to slow down. The deafening noise of the flames continued, but gazes turned to him. Each step was accompanied by the bated breath of the crowd. Some no longer had the courage to look, others twisted in silence as if in front of a movie scene. But it was real. A simple animal, nameless in headlines with no recorded history, was about to rewrite the fate of a forgotten life inside. That scene alone revealed how small decisions have a profound impact, not just on the present, but on how an entire community would come to see what courage means. And here is a reflection. How often do we not ignore those who seem small, insignificant, incapable of great deeds? The transformation of that night did not come from a leader, an expert, or someone in a position of power. It came from a mongrel, from a being accustomed to marginality, who decided to act when no one else had the courage. This revelation is powerful because it dismantles our certainties about who may or may not be a hero. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject because what seemed like just an isolated act of animal instinct carries with it layers of meaning that touch on our mentality, on our emotional backstage, and on the revelations that only emerge in extreme moments. It is in this kind of scene that we understand how the transformation happens, not only in the hero, but also in each person who witnesses the impossible before his eyes. He says, "I'm on this journey too." The doors of the hospital were almost inaccessible, taken over by flames that roared like an indomitable beast. People took a few steps forward, but soon retreated, suffocated by smoke and the fear of not returning. It was an invisible boundary that no one dared to cross. The feeling was that there was a wall of fire separating those on the outside from those still trapped inside. No one could muster enough courage to cross that barrier. It was then that the unexpected happened. The dog, that same mongrel who seemed just another one in the routine of the city, made the decision that no human dared at that moment. Without hesitation, he advanced towards the entrance taken by fire. As the humans hesitated, his instinct spoke louder. The scene seemed impossible. The noise of the flares mingled with the crackling of wood, and every second the hospital turned into a field of destruction. Still, the animal broke through the smokescreen as if responding to an invisible call. The silence of the crowd contrasted with the roar of the flames, and with each step the suspense grew. Would he be able to resist? To survive that? The heat was already unbearable outside. Imagining what was inside made anyone shiver. But the dog moved forward as if there was no alternative, as if he knew that his journey had a purpose that surpassed the instinct of self-preservation. Inside the hospital, the scene was a maze of shadows and danger. The ground was covered in debris, pieces of ceiling were beginning to sag, and the thick smoke made it almost impossible to see. The walls, once white, were now devoured by black stains, and the air smelled of burnt plastic and red-hot wood. Every breath was a struggle, every second a risk. But the dog seemed guided by something bigger than life itself. He didn't back down, he didn't get lost in the chaos, he just kept going. He sniffed the air, moved quickly, dodged obstacles as if he had walked that path before. Instinct turned every step into a sure decision, as if the life that needed to be saved was silently calling him. The corridors, which moments before had been filled with shouting and running, were now almost empty. Panic had driven most people out. There were only echoes of voices, doors that banged loudly and the sound of alarms that insisted on ringing. In the heart of the hospital, however, the forgotten detail was still there. The newborn baby, alone in his crib, with the faint cry lost amid the chaos. And this is where the impossible begins to take shape. As firefighters organized to enter with equipment, while parents and family members begged for news, a simple dog, untrained, unprotected, advanced deeper and deeper into an inferno that seemed insurmountable. The suspense grew by the minute. Outside, some could no longer look, afraid to witness the scene of an animal that would be lost in the fire. But others kept their eyes fixed, as if believing that something extraordinary was about to happen. This division showed a lot about the collective mentality. While some surrendered to fear, others were overcome by hope. It was a silent battle between the certainty of tragedy and the possibility of miracle. The impact of that choice was not only in saving a life, but in bringing about a transformation in the heart of every person who witnessed it. Inside, the dog finally made it to the children's ward. The heat was suffocating, and the smoke formed a heavy mantle that left the air almost solid, as if you could touch it with your hands. The baby, wrapped in blankets, could barely move. Her crying was even weaker, as if life was dying out little by little like a flame about to be extinguished. But in that instant, something changed. The attentive muzzle found the cradle. The animal's gaze, although overshadowed by the fire, seemed to understand the gravity of that moment. There was no time to think, no room to hesitate. He simply snapped the blanket carefully, firm enough to hold but delicate so as not to injure. And so, with the little body safe between his teeth, the dog turned toward the way back. But getting out would be even harder than getting in. The hospital now seemed to fall to pieces. Flares fell from the ceiling, doors creaked before giving in to the heat, and the thin air made each step heavier. The return journey was an impossible ordeal even for trained humans, but the heroic instinct did not retreat. The animal advanced, dodged debris, crawled when necessary, protecting that baby as if carrying the most precious thing in the world. From the outside, the suspense reached its limit. Time seemed frozen. People cried, some prayed aloud, others cheered in silence. Every second without news was a collective torture. It was as if the whole city was living the same feeling, united by the invisible thread of uncertainty. And then, amid the flare of flames and the smoke screen, a shadow began to form. It was small, but firm. The crowd held their breath. Would it be possible? Was the dog really coming back? This scene was not just an act of bravery. It was a real-time transformation, a revelation that exposed hidden truths about courage, about instinct, about the impact that even the most unlikely can make. While everyone was retreating, an animal advanced. While logic said it was impossible, it showed that there was always a chance when the decision is driven by what is purest, the will to save. And with each step, with each second, the tension increased. The dog coughed in the heavy air, its paws slipping amid the rubble, but its eyes remained fixed on the light coming from outside. The baby, protected by the blanket, remained quiet, as if he had found an unlikely refuge in the midst of chaos. The whole hospital seemed to collapse, but there was still movement, there was still life, there was still struggle. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what we are seeing is not only the rescue of a life, but the birth of a narrative that stirs our mentality, that questions our certainties, and that reminds us of something essential. Courage is not the privilege of consecrated heroes, but it can arise from where it is least expected. And when that happens, the impact is so powerful that it transforms not just the moment but everyone who witnesses it. He says, "That makes sense to me." The hospital looked like it was about to collapse. The flares lit up the night like living torches, consuming windows, doors, and entire walls. The sound was deafening, crackles of wood giving way, glass breaking, and the constant roar of fire that gave no respite. Outside, the crowd was in a trance, as if watching a spectacle that mixed tragedy and hope. Every look was fixed on the entrance to the building, every breath was heavy with expectation. Then, amid the thick smoke, a shadow began to stand out, small, low, but firm. Someone shouted, another pointed, and everyone stopped as if time had frozen. That was him, the dog. Its singed fur reflected the glare of the flames, and its trembling paws betrayed the enormous effort it made to advance. But what really broke the silence wasn't just the sight of him returning. It was the detail he carried between his teeth. Wrapped in a blanket, protected with a delicacy almost impossible in that scenario, was the baby. In the midst of the inferno of fire and smoke, an anonymous mongrel appeared, bringing in his teeth the life that everyone had forgotten. The shock was immediate. People put their hands to their mouths, unable to contain their crying. Some knelt, others raised their arms to the sky in a reflex of gratitude, and there were those who just trembled, as if the body alone revealed the impact of witnessing the impossible. The dog advanced slowly, exhausted but determined. Each step was accompanied by the bated breath of the crowd, as if the whole city shared the same heart, beating hard, racing, on the border between fear and hope. There was a hidden truth evident in that picture. When logic collapses, what remains are the decisions that are born of the purest: courage, instinct, care. And to see it incarnated in a street animal, without uniform, without supposed social role, overthrew certainties and stirred everyone's mentality. A nurse ran as if every second was decisive territory. The corridor of people opened, natural, almost reverent, and the dog laid the small burden at her feet, keeping an attentive eye for 1,000th of the time, as one who delivers and at the same time makes sure that life was received. The baby's cry came in a thread, first timid, then more present, filling the air with a sound no one expected to hear there. It was in this cry that everyone found confirmation. There was life, there was chance, there was meaning. And suddenly, the night that until then had only known the cruel glow of the fire gained a different, intimate glow, made of tears and relief. The backstory of that moment revealed other layers. The firefighters, struggling to contain the flames, exchanged glances that said more than words. They had witnessed heroic deeds, but it touched them in a new, almost pedagogical way. An experienced doctor, face dirty with soot, discreetly wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, and a boy, on his father's lap, whispered that The dog is an angel. The entire city at one point seemed to have received a silent lecture on the impact of a choice, and it was impossible not to see the transformation. That mongrel, so often invisible in the routine, became a symbol of something that does not fit in the headlines. It was proof that courage is also a mindset that manifests itself where we least expect it. While the nurse quickly gauged the baby's signs, another professional covered the dog with a wet sheet to relieve the heat of the singed hair. The animal gasped. The chest rose and fell with effort, but there was serenity in the posture, a presence that inspired calm. Someone approached a bowl of water. He drank little, as if afraid to take his eyes off what he had saved. Within minutes, a team improvised a screening. Oxygen for the baby, checking for superficial burns, compresses. The chaos of the fire had not ceased, but a small island of meaning was born there at the foot of the door, as if that piece of ground had been chosen for a truce. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what we call a miracle sometimes has behind the scenes that need to be looked at closely, not to diminish the extraordinary, but to understand its invisible cogs. There are decisions that seem to be born out of nowhere, but that in fact spring from a silent journey. That dog, seen by many as just a mutt, carried in his eyes the story of a city that fed him, of children who stroked him, of doors that once or another opened to give him shelter on a rainy night. This network of small gestures, so often despised, creates an invisible field where certain acts become possible. The revelation is this: there is no courage that is not nourished by the bond, and the bond, in turn, is born of small, repeated decisions that refine the sensitivity to what matters. If you watch carefully, the moment is not just the dog coming up with the baby. It is the entire sequence of microchips that precedes the climax. It is the initial step against the hot wind, the snout that sniffs the right direction, the precise deflection of the falling piece of ceiling, the delicacy of the teeth when attaching the blanket, the return calculated by instinct, the care to land but not to let go, of life at the feet of the nurse. Each gesture in a scene like this participates in a larger choreography, where courage and delicacy dance side by side. The hidden truth of courage is that it is not only strength, it is precision, it is responsibility, it is affection applied. The crowd, once paralyzed, began to move with another energy. It wasn't just the frenzy of fear, it was a collective vibration that redirected panic into readiness. Neighbors offered to load cylinders, someone brought wet towels, another made way for the ambulance. The miracle had produced a side effect: organization. The impact of seeing a selfless act kindles in viewers a sense of duty that was dormant. And when a community awakens to its own potency, the backstage of tragedy shrinks in size, not by magic, but by cohesion. There were, of course, questions that prevailed and would haunt the memory of those who testified. Why did no one listen to the baby before? How exactly did the dog find that room? What inside us falters when we have to cross the border of fear? These are not questions to blame. They are invitations to mindset review. Because the miracle, when it arrives, does not come only to enchant. It invites us to rearrange priorities, teaches without speech, only showing. It clearly says that between the impossible and the done, there is a gap called the decision. The baby breathed better, wrapped in new blankets, and the team already referred him to another care unit. The dog followed with his gaze, as if to make sure that the journey, that little journey he had taken, had reached a safe haven. All around, faces displayed a mixture of weariness and victory, cries of relief, long hugs, watery eyes that recognized each other. The city at that moment was not just a collection of houses, streets, and people. It was a community in transformation, linked by a thread of meaning that even fire could not burn. And yet, there was more. The fire kept demanding everything from the firefighters. Lives still needed to be protected. Decisions continued to be made in sequence. The miracle does not end the story. It changes the way the story proceeds. From then on, each movement carried the mark of that moment of revelation. There was a four-legged hero lying on the hot asphalt, breathing hard, but keeping his gaze alive. There was a baby who, once almost forgotten, took up the very possibility of a future. And there was an entire city that suddenly remembered values that do not fit into routine: care, audacity, shared responsibility. If someone asked what was the exact second when everything changed, perhaps no one would know the answer. Some would say, that's when the dog decided to come in. Others, when he appeared at the door with the baby. And there would be those who would point out the instant when the first cry echoed and redrawn the night. Beauty and strength lies precisely in accepting that transformation spreads in waves. It begins in a gesture and expands in meanings. So it is with stories that remain. They don't end, they unfold. And that's why even with the baby safe and the team mobilized, no one could let go of the feeling that there was something to learn there. Something that went beyond the episode and signed up as a silent guide to upcoming decisions. Because when the extraordinary crosses us, it installs a new pattern within us. From it, what was acceptable becomes smaller, what was urgent becomes clearer, and what was invisible becomes visible. It is when a community looks at itself and understands that the journey continues, transformed by what it has just witnessed. Now that this image is already embedded in your imagination, the dog, the door, the baby, the crying, the city around, the next step is not to close the story, but to recognize what it asks of us, a more attentive listening to details, a courage that is trained in small choices, a commitment to what really matters. The night is not yet over. The fire still requires effort, and hearts, although lighter, continue to learn from what they have seen. There are more layers to reveal, more backstage to illuminate, more decisions that, when added together, define destinies. He said, "That makes sense to me." The sound of sirens still echoed through the small town's narrow streets, mixed in with the crackling of flames that insisted on consuming every bit of the community hospital. The air was heavy, suffused with smoke, but now there was a breath of hope in the environment. The moment that seemed like a miracle began to gain outlines of reality. The firefighters, who until then had struggled to make room in front of the fire, finally managed to advance in greater numbers, bringing with them more powerful hoses, tools to open the way, and oxygen cylinders. The partially collapsed main entrance was controlled with continuous jets of water, and the scene began to change pace. It was no longer just chaos. It was also the beginning of the organized response that everyone had been waiting for. The crowd, still stunned by the dog's feat, made way for the professionals to take charge. And it was at that moment that the tension turned into collective action. Doctors, paramedics, and nurses who were outside rushed to meet the fire crew. Everyone was in a hurry, but there was now a renewed confidence, a different energy. The baby was no longer alone in the crib surrounded by smoke. He was in the arms of those who could ensure his survival. A nurse, still panting, handed the little one to a doctor who quickly started the first examinations right there in front of the crowd. With quick gestures, he checked his breathing, heartbeat, reflexes. The baby, though weakened, reacted. The cry now sounded clearer, firmer, as if life itself wanted to announce that it had resisted. It was at that moment that the news spread. He was alive and without serious injuries. The outburst of emotion was immediate. People who had never spoken hugged each other. Tears ran down their faces without any embarrassment, and the weight of fear turned into a shared relief. And the dog, the unlikely hero, was there, lying on the ground, gasping for quick breaths. Their fur was marked by heat, some slight burns were visible, and their paws trembled from the outsized effort. But he did not run away, did not turn away. Even injured, he kept his eyes fixed on the baby, as if he still needed to make sure that the life he had saved was really safe. It was a powerful image. On one side, the professionals confirming that the child had survived. On the other, the exhausted animal, silent witness that the impossible had been conquered. Firefighters approached to offer care to the dog as well. One of them, accustomed to dealing with extreme rescues, knelt down and gently extended his hand, as if recognizing that in that tired body there was a rare strength. They brought a bucket of fresh water, wet their paws, ran wet towels over their fur to relieve the heat. The animal accepted it calmly, as if it understood that finally it no longer needed to fight alone. That battle was over, and he could finally rest. This contrast between the baby crying loudly in the arms of the medical staff and the dog taking a deep breath on the floor turned the scene into something unforgettable. It was as if two lives, so different and so fragile, came together in that instant to teach everyone about the impact of decisions. The whole city watched the unfolding, and every look reflected the same awareness. They were before an event that could not be reduced to a simple news. There was a symbol, a landmark, a lesson etched forever. The backstage of that moment revealed more than the eye could grasp. There were firefighters who, even though they were used to the risk, shook their heads in silence as if acknowledging that they had witnessed something they would never forget. Experienced doctors, so often faced with borderline situations, felt the symbolic weight of examining that baby saved in such an unlikely way. And ordinary people, neighbors, workers, mothers and fathers, experienced together an inner transformation, the recognition that courage can arise in the most unlikely places and that instinct can reveal truths that logic refuses to see. The city, once dominated by fear, now breathed a little more relieved. Not because the fire was under full control, there was still much to be done, but because the narrative of that night had changed. What would be remembered was not only the burning building, but the confirmed rescue. It was the sound of the baby crying. It was the image of the dog lying down. It was the collective consciousness that they had witnessed a scene that carried within it the power of transformation. And this is the essence of revelation. To understand that certain moments do not happen just to mark the present, but to redefine mindsets, to inspire future decisions. Every person who was there would take a piece of that history with them. Over the next few days, months, years, the episode would be told and retold, and each time it was recalled, it would rekindle the impact of that night. Because it wasn't just about lives saved, it was about hope returned, faith renewed, a reminder that even in the darkest chaos, unexpected light can shine. The dog, still lying down, was carefully placed on a small makeshift stretcher to receive care. Some residents insisted on accompanying, as if they did not want to leave him alone, even for an instant. Others remained close to the baby, following with their eyes every gesture of the medical team. The whole city had adopted the two protagonists of the night, the newborn and the mutt. Together they symbolized the strength of life and the hidden truth that heroism is not measured by titles or appearances, but by actions. Now, I want to go even deeper into this matter, because to understand the confirmed rescue is not only to ascertain that there were survivors, it is to realize that behind every decision, every gesture, there are behind the scenes that reveal who we really are. This journey shows us that courage can be silent, that the impact of a choice can echo for generations, and that transformation doesn't just happen in the moment, but continues to reverberate long after the flames die down. He said, "That makes sense to me." The news spread first on the city's own air before any cameras or microphones even arrived. It was as if the wind had carried the revelation that something extraordinary had just happened. The fire was still burning, the firefighters continued to fight the flames, but the attention of the community was already focused on another point. The saved baby and the dog, who, even injured, remained lying with panting but firm, as if silently watching the fruit of his decision. People hugged each other. Some wept copiously. Others clapped their hands in spontaneous applause that echoed through the streets, a sound that contrasted with the crackle of fire and the confusion of tragedy. That collective display of emotion needed no rehearsal. It was the natural response to an act that had touched every heart present. The dog, previously seen only as part of the everyday scenario, was now recognized as the protagonist of an impossible scene. Children pointed at him with wide eyes. Adults called him a hero, and even firefighters, accustomed to feats of courage, bowed in respect. There was something almost sacred in the air, as if that moment had suspended the weight of tragedy for a few moments and given the city a chance to breathe hope. The impact was visible. Faces once dominated by fear were now illuminated by tears of relief, and the entire community seemed to experience, at the same time, the revelation that there are still gestures capable of uniting everyone in a single emotion. The first images began to be recorded. A local journalist who had arrived to cover the fire could hardly believe his eyes. The camera, which initially focused on the flames consuming the hospital, now sought to capture the dog lying down, the baby in the nurse's arms, and the collective reaction exploding all around. Within minutes, photos circulated in message groups, emotional audios were sent to distant family members, and the story that until then was restricted to those present began to spread throughout the city. It was as if each resident wanted to be the bearer of that narrative, to repeat to others the scene he had witnessed, to ensure that no one was left without knowing what had happened. And this desire to tell wasn't just curiosity, it was the need to share a hidden truth that for a moment had become palpable, that courage and love don't depend on titles, status, or conditions. They were simple people describing the improbable, trying to find words to explain what the eyes had just seen. A dog went into the fire and brought a baby in his teeth. The phrase sounded unbelievable, even to those who said it, but it carried with it the weight of truth. With each repetition, the story gained more strength, like a flame that this time did not destroy, but illuminated. Meanwhile, on the spot, the applause grew louder. Some shouted words of encouragement, others simply watched in reverent silence, but all recognized that they were facing something greater than tragedy. The community, which minutes before seemed doomed to impotence, now felt part of an event of transformation. It was as if everyone had been rescued along with the baby. Rescued from disbelief, from absolute fear, from the feeling that nothing could be done. The dog's act had crossed the impossible and restored to each person there the awareness that decisions matter, even when made by those no one expected. And then came the quick interviews, the first lines picked up by the local media. One mother said in a choked voice that she would never forget that scene because she learned before her own eyes that heroes have no definite form. One firefighter, still holding the hose, admitted that he had never seen anything like it in his career. An elderly man leaning on his cane repeated softly that he had lived long enough to know that he had witnessed a miracle. Each statement was a fragment of the collective mentality that was beginning to form. That this dog was no longer just a mutt of the city, but a symbol, a living reference to what everyone wants to find in themselves, the courage to act at the right time. The most striking thing was to notice how the narrative expanded beyond the fire. It was not just a rescue, but a revelation that touched the journey of each person present. The tragedy would not only be remembered for the destruction of the hospital, but for the impact of an unlikely choice that changed everything. That is the power of stories that touch deep. They are not restricted to the instant. They reverberate, cross borders, and find meaning in distant places. And that's what was already beginning to happen. While the flames were still being fought, while the smell of smoke still permeated the air, the story of the hero dog was already making its way through mobile phones, radios, and in a short time would reach the first headlines. But what was really recorded was not the headline itself, but the scene that each witness would carry in their memory. The silence that preceded his appearance at the door, the cry that confirmed life, the applause that exploded in unison. This sequence of moments would be told and retold, gaining details, versions, but always carrying the same essence. The revelation that even in the midst of chaos, something can be born that returns us to faith. The city, at that moment, was transformed. And this transformation would not be fleeting, because such a truth does not fade with time. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because the reaction of the community is not just collective emotion. It reveals behind the scenes of how we form our symbols, how individual decisions have the power to reprogram entire mindsets, and how, amid the chaos, revelations emerge that change not just the narrative of a day, but the journey of a generation. He said, "That makes sense to me." The repercussion that began on the corners of the city did not take long to cross borders. First it was local newspapers, then regional radio, and then national television networks that captured the power of that story. The images recorded by amateur cell phones showed the moment in which the dog crossed the smoke, with burning eyes, singed fur, and still bringing between the teeth the baby wrapped in blankets. It was impossible to watch that scene without feeling an immediate impact, an emotional shock that transcended any barrier of language, belief, or culture. Quickly, the news went from being just an account of a burning city to becoming a narrative of transformation that gripped the attention of an entire country. Television stations competed to show the details of the feat, auditorium programs made emotional mentions, and even the most serious news devoted prominent space to tell how a mutt dog with no known owner had become the protagonist of a heroic act that even the most experienced firefighters would not dare to perform. Reporters described the scene as a miracle witnessed live, and commentators referred to the animal as a symbol of courage in times of fear. With each repetition of the story, the image of the dog ceased to be just that of some mongrel to take on a new meaning, that of a four-legged angel. Social media exploded within days. Hashtags were created, Messages of support flooded timelines, and streams of solidarity surged in every corner. People wrote long texts describing how they had cried while watching the scene. Others reported that they showed the video to their children as a lesson in courage and compassion. Memes, artistic tributes, and even drawings made by children began to circulate, turning the dog into a popular icon. There was an almost collective need to reciprocate what that act had represented, a breath of hope in a time when so much news carries only pain and fear. It didn't take long for the authorities to speak out as well. Mayors of neighboring cities, governors, and even congressmen sent public notes praising the courage of the animal. Symbolic medals were created in honor of him, and the firefighters, moved, made sure to hand over an official decoration, placing on the dog's neck a small plaque that recognized him as part of the honorary corporation. It was a simple gesture, but loaded with symbolism, a recognition that, even without a uniform, this being had put himself on the same level as the heroes who risk their lives daily to save others. And along with the tributes came the adoption proposals. Families from various parts of the country, called the City Hall and Animal Shelters, wanting to take home the dog that had won the hearts of millions. Each request was accompanied by an emotional justification. We want to repay what he did. He deserves a life of comfort. It would be an honor to have such a hero in our home. The local authorities had to intervene, explaining that the decision would be taken carefully to ensure that his fate was as dignified as possible. What was once just an anonymous mongrel was now treated as the emotional patrimony of an entire nation. The international press also surrendered. In the United States, major news channels dedicated special reports to the feat, calling the dog guardian angel, and highlighting that even in the midst of the greatest tragedies, there are stories that restore faith in humanity, or in this case, in life in its purest form. American journalists said with clarity that it was not just a rescue, but a narrative that brought with it hidden truths about courage, instinct, and the invisible connection between living beings. The expression four-legged angel began to be repeated in different languages, gaining strength as a title that crossed borders and united cultures around a single image, that of a dog bringing a baby out of the flames. This national and international recognition was not just a matter of fame or passing commotion. He carried with him the impact of a profound transformation because he made people reflect on forgotten values. Every interview, every report, every viral post was not just about the dog, but about the choices each of us could make in the face of fear. It was a reminder that courage is not the absence of danger, but the decision to act in spite of it. And in times when so much news makes us believe that we are surrounded only by insoluble problems, the gesture of an anonymous animal rekindled a flame of collective hope. And this reflection also touched the backstage of the social mentality. Animal welfare organizations are now receiving more calls and requests for adoption than ever before. People who previously ignored street dogs began to look at them differently, as if each invisible animal carried in itself the possibility of revealing a heroic instinct. Schools organized lectures using history as an example, and psychologists commented in interviews that this achievement brought out the importance of recognizing the strength of instinct, the capacity for transformation that exists even in the most unlikely scenarios. The dog in turn remained the same, simple, silent, without asking for anything in return. He continued to stare with the same serene expression, as if unaware of the extent to which his decision had reached. But it was exactly this contrast that was most striking. While the world called him a hero, he just rested, demonstrating the hidden truth that everyone needed to see. Greatness is not in recognition, but in the act itself. The impact was made, and the tributes were just the materialization of collective gratitude. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because national recognition does not speak only of an award or a headline. It exposes how we as a society choose symbols to represent our greatest virtues. He shows us that heroes are not only those who carry titles or positions, but also those who, in the silence of the most unlikely decisions, transform the mentality of an entire nation. He says, "I'm on this journey too." The scene of the dog going through the flames with the baby in its teeth was not just an isolated episode that thrilled in the heat of the moment. It began to morph into something much bigger, into a collective narrative that reflected much more than the courage of an animal. It was as if everyone stood before an invisible mirror, forced to reflect on how they act in the face of danger, on the choices they make when fear screams louder than reason. While many run, this dog showed the world that true courage does not depend on size, strength, or species. It's an intimate, almost silent decision to keep going, even when everything around you seems to be telling you to back off. And that's exactly what touched people so deeply, realizing that such an improbable gesture could carry such a powerful revelation. This reflection was not restricted to the time of the fire. As the days went by, each replay of the video, each news report aired, each emotional comment brought back the same feeling. The dog not only rescued a baby, he also rescued a forgotten part inside each of us. A part that we often suffocate under the routine, under the fears, under the logic that insists on saying what is possible or impossible. By going through the fire, he showed what it means to overcome invisible limits, those that are not made of flares, but of doubts and insecurities that paralyze us. This journey stirred the collective mindset, because it reminded us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the presence of purpose, the presence of something greater that guides us when all seems lost. Many psychologists, philosophers, and spiritual leaders were interviewed and said something similar, that this act was a living symbol of the transformation that happens when one acts moved by the purest instinct to protect life. There was no calculation, there was no planning, there was no time to measure risks, there was only the immediate decision to move on. And it is precisely in this that the beauty of the scene lies, an instinct that has become action, and in becoming action has changed the fate of not only one child, but also of an entire community, of an entire country, and now even of those who watch this story in any part of the world. And here lives an important revelation. Courage is not a distant virtue, reserved for superheroes or historical characters. It is, in fact, an accessible, everyday choice that reveals itself the moment we decide to act. How often do we find ourselves faced with situations in which everything inside us screams to flee, but something deeper asks to stay, to act, to face? How often do we not feel that we have within us the strength to cross the flames, but let fear dictate the rules? This dog, without rational conscience, without words, without titles, showed us what it means to step beyond the limit. He showed that sometimes it is necessary to listen to that inner call, that voice that does not come from logic, but from the essence, because it is in it that true courage dwells, and maybe that's why so many people identified. Not because they will one day enter a burning building, but because they have all faced or will face their own invisible fires, moments when everything seems to fall apart, when the pressure is unbearable, and when there is no guarantee of victory. Situations in which life calls for a decision, to run away or move forward. The dog advanced, and in doing so, it has given each of us a powerful reminder that we can do the same, each within our own reality, behind the scenes of our own journey. The impact of this reflection went beyond commotion. It has also sparked deep questions about compassion, empathy, and the hidden truth we often try to ignore, that you don't have to have power, wealth, or recognition to be able to transform a life. Transformation can come from a simple, unexpected, improbable gesture. It can come from a look, from an outstretched hand, from a decision made in seconds that changes the course of an entire story. This is the kind of revelation that doesn't just fit in the news, but echoes within us for much longer. And here comes another detail. While many applauded and celebrated, there were also those who were silent, just reflecting. And that silence was just as powerful, because it carried the seed of change. It was the silence of those who recognized that perhaps they had retreated in the place of the dog, of those who realized that there are internal battles that have not yet been won, of those who understood that courage is a constant journey and not a point of arrival. This kind of impact is not measured in medals or headlines, but in the intimate transformation that happens in every person who allows themselves to be touched by history. And here's something even more impressive: the awareness that when we look at that dog, we all see a reflection of our own ability to choose. Because deep down, life will always put us in front of fires, some literal, some metaphorical, and what defines who we are is not the intensity of the flames, but what we decide to do in front of them. The dog showed that even when there is no logical reason to believe, there is still room for hope and action. And this perception, which seems simple, turns into something immense when we stop to think about how many times we let fear prevent us from acting. It is as if the history of this animal has torn off a veil that covers our own hesitations. Suddenly, we see more clearly that courage is not a rare gift, but a decision that can be made every day. Small choices accumulate, form trajectories, build legacies, and perhaps the greatest revelation of this story lies right there, in the power we have to decide, in every moment, what our response to fear will be. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the reflection that is born from this scene is not only about courage in an extreme moment, but about how we live in everyday life, about the small decisions we make, and that often carry in themselves the same heroic essence. It's about understanding that the impact we leave on the world is not in the great deeds recorded by the media, but in the silent sum of the choices we make, the risks we take, and the way we choose to respond to fear. It is about understanding that courage is not an isolated act, but a continuous journey, made of revelations, of falls, of resumes, of decisions that shape who we are. He said, "That makes sense to me. This is proof that heroes can have pause and bark, but not only that, it is also proof that life surprises us when we least expect it. Who could have imagined that, in the midst of the chaos of a fire, when logic said there was nothing more to be done, an anonymous dog would emerge as the protagonist of such a profound transformation? What seemed only a tragedy took on another meaning, because amid the ashes and flames was born a story of hope, courage, and surrender that will echo for a long time. And when we reflect on that, we realize that the biggest symbols of impact don't come from the places we usually look. We often expect the heroes in uniform, the prepared leaders, the people with titles and positions of authority. But the hidden truth is that the extraordinary can spring precisely from the improbable, from the invisible, from what seemed unimportant. And that's powerful because it changes the mindset of everyone watching. If a stray dog was able to walk through the fire and save a life, what doesn't that say about us, who so often find ourselves small, powerless, or voiceless? This story invites us to look within and realize that perhaps we are surrounded by small opportunities to act courageously. And courage here does not necessarily mean facing a burning building, but it can mean making a decision that has been delayed, taking a step on a journey that seemed too risky, or even offering support to someone who needs a gesture of empathy. The impact of what we do is not measured by the size of the action, but by the truth with which it is born. And that's the kind of revelation that the scene of the dog carrying the baby in its teeth left us. We don't have to wait for great moments to live meaningfully. And the most interesting thing is to realize how a single scene can become a collective journey. The video of the rescue spread, crossed borders, touched different cultures, touched hearts of all ages. In each sharing, there was a new detail being perceived. Some were moved by the strength, others by the delicacy, others by the determination in the animal's eyes. And it shows how the same story can have multiple impacts, depending on how it encounters each person. This plurality of interpretations is what makes the message even richer. Behind the scenes of all this, there is also a powerful reminder about choices. The dog could have stood still, could have protected itself, could have retreated like everyone else. But he decided to move on. This is the essence we need to keep. Deep down, we are shaped by the decisions we make in moments of pressure. It is in that instant, when there is no time for rehearsals or calculations, that we show who we really are. And if a dog was able to show this to the world, isn't it just an invitation for us to also allow ourselves to live with more dedication, with more courage and less fear? This story, told and retold, creates a kind of silent transformation in the listener. Because without realizing it, we begin to ask ourselves, what are the flames that I still need to cross? What are the fears I let paralyze me? What decisions have I been putting off because I believe I am not capable? And when that question sets in, we can't go back to where we were before. That's what makes stories like this so remarkable. They don't just thrill, they stir the mindset. They open doors to inner revelations that might never have happened otherwise. And it is at this point that emotion connects with practice. It's not just about being moved by a hero dog, but about realizing the impact it can have on the way we live. Maybe it's an invitation to be bolder, maybe it's a call to be more compassionate. Maybe it's the reminder that deep down there is always a way out, even when there seems to be nothing else to do. This is the legacy of this animal, to show that even in the face of the impossible, it is still possible to transform. And here comes the importance of keeping that message alive. Because the fire went out, the baby was saved, the dog was recognized. But the real power of this story lies in what it continues to provoke. It is like an invisible flame that does not go out, that passes from person to person, rekindling hopes, awakening mentalities, and inspiring actions. And the more this flame spreads, the stronger the collective impact becomes. So if this story touched your heart, if at any time you felt a shiver, a tear in your eye, or even a desire to reflect on your own journey, I ask for something very simple, but very powerful. Leave your like in this video, because it shows me that this message found you for real. Subscribe to the channel to continue following stories that have the power to transform us from the inside and remind us that life goes far beyond routine. And share this video with someone who loves dogs or who needs that breath of hope, because we never know in whose heart this story might shine a new light. This isn't just a call to action. It's a heartfelt invitation to be a part of this community that believes messages like this deserve to be taken forward, because every comment, every like, every share is not just a number, but a way to keep alive the flame that this scene ignited. It is as if we are together side by side, spreading courage and hope in a world that so often insists on showing us only tragedies. Here we show that the improbable also exists, that transformation is possible, and that even a dog can become a symbol of unconditional love. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because although it seems that we have reached the end of the story, in fact, this is where a new stage begins, that of understanding how this message connects directly with our own life, and how we can transform the impact of this scene into practical decisions for our day-to-day. He said, "I'm on this journey too. After all that we have lived together in this story, if you have come this far with me, it already shows how much this message has touched you in some way. That's why I want to invite you to continue on this journey. Subscribe to the channel, because here there is always room for stories that inspire, that awaken reflections, and that remind us that life can be much more than the routine of everyday life. And since we've built that connection all the way, like this video, not as an automatic gesture, but as a sign that this conversation made sense to you. And to mark this moment, write in the comments, 'I'm with you until the end.' It will be amazing to see who really walked with me to that last word. And of course, if this message touched you, I know you will want to continue. There is a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there.